Cervignano del Friuli. It's because it's where I was born, and coming back from the Biennale in 1952, among hordes of people, I got off at the station and I said, I'm never leaving here again. Because this place reminds me of so many things. And there are many mysteries. Pasolini told me, you're hiding, just like Kafka. I designed all of this with a young architect friend of mine. My experience as a painter, who at a certain point in his life was forced to live a double life, to get up early and to go to bed very late, because he must also write. My experience with Pasolini was very unusual because he practically blackmailed me. Let's find a nicer way of putting this. Let's say he slowly, without force, and with the graceful manner that he had, and the free exchange of ideas that rarely dwelled on the problems of life. Well, he practically forced me into writing about him. And I started from a moment in which Pasolini revealed to me the very function of death. Because the function of death for Pasolini is everything. If you omit death from Pasolini's history, or from his work and his life, and his death and obviously how it happened, it would be like taking Pasolini and discarding him forever. Because death is the most important element in the Pasolini story. It is a necessary, effective, and absolutely new perspective in which one can look at and judge, and perhaps more importantly, decipher a life's work. Because Pasolini speaks of a thriller that is purely intellectual, having translated an affirmation by Roland Barthes, who said a mythical tale is a thriller of intelligibility. So having said that, if we realize that Pasolini's death is like one of his stories, it's as if he staged his death, just like a theater piece. But then if not, then we haven't really read Pasolini, nor know him at all. So this theater of Pasolini, which he himself defines as diachronic, voyages through time like a spaceship, similar to the ones I paint. It flies through the sky, and in the arc of 18 years, arrives at its final destination in a tiny moment of uncertainty. Pasolini and this spaceship meet Maria Callas in 1969, and in his own way falls in love, but not in the banal sense, and thereby postpones his death. There were sparks everywhere in this rather curious environment. They had fatally attracted everyone's attention. Everyone followed Callas and Pasolini. At midnight, Pasolini gave this ring to Maria Callas, who had no idea she was to receive such a beautiful gift. Well, then Callas kissed him, like a woman kisses a man. And there you see Pasolini with his eyes wide open because he didn't expect such a passionate kiss from her. Well, so then this kiss then, let's say, had its consequences that were later cleared of its historic symbolism by, well, by Onassis' gift, which, as everyone knows, was the Isle of Vigeo. A deserted island with a big house where Callis, Pasolini writes, did nothing else but open windows in the morning and close them in the evening. They spent long nights on a pier, the sea air and the breeze, and they talked about their lives.
Subito dopo la guerra. Potrebbe essere stato.
Probably it was after the war, maybe 1945 or early 1946. He had already heard of me, and I obviously knew something of him as well, because it's a small world, and we had both read some things about each other. Well, he came up to me, and I recognized him, and he said, "You're Zagaina." And I said, "Yes." "And where are you from?" he asked. I said I was from Cervignano del Friuli. And as I already wrote in my first book, he says, "Well, I'm from Casarsa della Delizia," and he rolled his eyes heavenward.
C'è scritto testualmente. Il brigadiere Carcione Filippo, trovandosi in San Vito Tagliamento per servizio il giorno 10 corrente, da un confidente veniva a conoscenza che nella frazione di Ramuscello si era verificato uno scandalo che consisteva che 3 ragazzi minori avevano masturbato un individuo identificato in Pasolini Pierpaolo, di professione professore statale.
In una intervista.
I had already said in an interview what Pasolini had told me after he was arrested for solicitation of a minor. It was during a party, a typical summer party, when Pasolini retreated into the nearby woods with these 2 young boys to play, let's say. One of the 2 boys, as was common in those days, when every Saturday or Sunday you went to confession, I remember him telling me that the priest asked the usual question, "Did you commit any impure acts?" And the boy told him. "With who?" Next question. It seems that the boy told him how many times and all of that. It was then that Pasolini published a book of stories that was called Impure Acts, that directly referred to this incident. Well, everybody knows that when a priest receives confession, he is bound by silence. It was incredible how, after only a few hours, the Casarsa Carabinieri knew everything. Now, I don't want to accuse anybody, but this story takes on a reality of its own. It was all over the newspapers. As everybody knows, headlines, "Pasolini is accused of soliciting minors." Well, we had talked about it, and I told him if I were you, I'd leave this place and go far away. Forget about these people. Go. He said he had a relative in Rome who was an antique dealer, and so he took advantage of that. I saw Pasolini again in Rome. I believe it was the end of 1950. Yes, I'm sure, because I remember it was near the end, because at the time I had the opening of my exhibition at the Pincio Gallery at the Piazza del Popolo. Well, I saw Pasolini there, and he came, and we had made plans to see each other the next evening and evenings after that. He hardly knew anyone there. I believe he had just arrived in Rome, and it was Pasolini who helped me discover Rome. As we walked until the late hours amidst those Roman piazzas, and then off to the restaurants with all these youngsters around, reading and having fun with him. The RAI, which is the Italian National Broadcasting Network, called me from Rome, and they said, "Mr. Zagaina, we have some bad news for you." And they tell me that a disfigured body was found in Ostia, and that they think it could be that of Pasolini. But they say they will have to confirm it, and so I wait. I don't go fishing, I just wait. And at 10 a.m. they call me to indeed confirm it. I spoke to Graziella Carcossi's mother that afternoon. She lived in Udine. And we got a taxi, and we left for Rome. We arrived around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It was getting dark, and I found the situation unbelievable. Because his mother could no longer speak, because she was already in an advanced state of arterial sclerosis. Pasolini was careful of this fact as well, because he didn't want his mother to suffer in such a way, because it was indeed an enormous trauma for her. Well, even he had a mother. Laura Betty was keeping her company. Naldini was lying on the sofa with his arm over his eyes. And I came up, and I found myself in the middle of some very practical and precise problems. After discussing matters with Graziella, I had very many things to take care of. They found a notary public, and so I went off to talk to him. I brought him to the house, and some very serious decisions were made, also from a practical point of view. Then it dawned on me. Nobody had called. The phone never rang. Not even a telegram. Absolute silence. Because his death was an embarrassment for everyone. I was there when the telegram came from Moro's brother, a telegram from Maria Callas, and nothing else. You know how the telephone can be in these situations, but it never rang. So I decided to call the headquarters of the Communist Party, and I said, "Did you hear about Pasolini's death?" He said, "Of course, we were just talking about it. Because Pasolini is all alone on a marble slab in the morgue, and no one is there for him." And from that moment, an important decision was made to care for all the organizational problems. From that moment, the Communist Youth Movement was the first to give condolences. They took care of the funeral and organized the wake at the Cultural Ministry near that famous piazza where the funeral was held. In that moment, Pasolini relived in his own way Togliatti's funeral, which he had filmed in the past. This brings me to another fact that I had already raised when I was in Rome. The fact that someone wanted to shut him up for good because of the things he had written in his articles in Corriere della Sera. that were very provocative, but also wonderful in their literary inventions. It immediately came to mind regarding the circumstances of his death, and how the newspapers and radio described it, that he had made another of his films. He had even once filmed a scene from Canterbury right there in that Ostia football field. He went to Ostia quite often. Ostia means sacrificial victim, because in ancient times, Ostia was a place where they had made human sacrifices. I was struck by this fact about Ostia, and I suddenly realized that there was a kind of precise narrative device, and that it was all in code. Pasolini wrote in code because a news item is put in logical order with other news items, and they, of course, follow a course. And these announcements of his, through these famous metaphors, having resulted in being in perfect narrative coordination. Well, I really must tell you that I had this illumination as I was on my way to San Francisco, where I taught at the Art Institute, because I had this feeling about this kind of organized suicide that Pasolini himself spoke of in Heretic Empirism. There are phrases that make you stop and think. When he wrote, "A martyr director by free will." It's a very strange definition of a director. Martyred by free will. That is, he has himself killed. Pasolini chose November 2nd because it's the most sacred day among all possible civilizations. Because it's the day to honor the dead. It's not important whether it's May or July. That day is for celebrating and communicating certain things. Pasolini harbored so many complex and mysterious things inside, from his father and his mother and all that happened in his family, right up to the death of his brother, and the expulsion from the Communist Party, and his just being plain different. Pasolini just decided to go away. He decided to die. He didn't want to survive in that situation anymore. Free will is implicated in his death. The knowledge, the sensitivity, and the determination of a poet. Therefore, it's a very particular death, together with the desire to abandon this world that is suicide, while at the same time wanting to survive mythically, crossing over to myth while still alive, because Pasolini uses myth and legend in a very precise manner. It's something very practical and concrete. Pasolini uses the story of Anna, proposed by Kalevala Finnico, from the great Finnish saga, to tell his own story. Pasolini entrusts the myth, as when he spoke of the effectiveness of myth as fundamentally important for keeping memory alive after death.
Maestro, noi vorremmo vedere un segno da te.
Generazione malvagia e adultera. Pretende un segno, e nessun segno le sarà dato se non come quello di Giona il profeta. Giona stette 3 giorni e 3 notti nel ventre della balena. Il figlio dell'uomo starà 3 giorni e 3 notti nel seno della terra. Perfino gli uomini di Ninive risorgeranno nel giudizio con questa generazione e la condanneranno, perché essi si ravvidero alla predicazione di Giona. Ed ecco, uno di più di Giona è qui.
is no discontinuity between myth and religion. Christ is a mythological character in that everything the myth says is taken from facts that actually happened. Many think that a myth is only small talk. Let's call it an invention that has no link with reality. Pasolini turns this concept upside down. It's a concept that is shared by all the great philosophers and thinkers in the world. Cassirer, for example, explains that a myth refers to an actual fact that occurred, a nucleus that remains intangible, always the same, with an outward appearance that can change according to cultural or religious events, or in any given civilization. So Pasolini celebrates the myth of Jonah, who is under myth, as Pasolini conceived him, as the myth that represents the creation of the world. Having invented this new life, Pasolini creates a part of his world anew, that of the hereafter, and performs in Ostia on November 2nd, the Feast of the Defunct, the myth of death reborn again, dying in order to live, dying in order to live in the afterlife. It's death that speaks louder than anything else, because it is silent, and because it is considered the end of everything, when it is really the beginning of something. Nobody ever taught you that in school or in university, that death can indeed be a language. Pasolini, incredibly Marxist, communist, heretic, whatever you want, but he's always thought that a man's death, that is, the end of a story, could be the beginning of another life. If one dies and never hears about Goethe or Michelangelo or Dante or Shakespeare, then death is truly the end of everything. We know today that one who truly lives in every sense of the word, not in the banal sense, like brushing your teeth or eating or shitting, but like Dante or Michelangelo. And the whole world that goes to see the Sistine Chapel and see this great miracle. Now, speaking of this subject, Pasolini was, he was terrified of showing up afterward in the afterlife without bringing his project to its final conclusion. If at the last minute he didn't find the courage to have himself killed, well, he was terrified that he would go down in history as a simple suitor, a romantic wooer of death. Many critics in Rome used this phrase again and again, but Pasolini was careful not to fall into this trap, and therefore, right up to the last minute, was able to go forward with his message of his divine mimesis. Actually, because 10 days before having to consign his manuscript to his publisher, he commits divine mimesis, because at that point, he imitates his own life. By making the film Vangelo in his other work, his films, his writings, and his poetry. By showing beforehand what would happen to a life spent reaching for death.
La morte.
Non mi capacito di una morte così violenta, capito? Anche se lui qualche volta mi ha detto io farò una morte violenta,
l'ultima notte che Pierpaolo, che la notte è morto, stavamo insieme a un ristorante, e eravamo io, mia moglie e i miei bambini, e stavamo mangiando a un ristorante dal Pomidoro a San Lorenzo. E niente, una sera come un'altra, stavamo lì mangiando e così si parlava del più e del meno. E siamo venuti a un discorso strano, chissà perché Pierpaolo mi ha fatto questo discorso, non capisco ancora perché mi abbia fatto questo discorso.
E allora Ninetto gli fa delle domande.
So Ninetto asked him, "Why are you leaving so early, Pierpaolo?" And Pasolini answers with a phrase that is very symptomatic and allusive. He says, "I have to go and work on one of my scripts." Instead, he had to go and work on a real action scene on a football field in Ostia.
Io sono una forza del passato, solo nella tradizione è il mio amore. Vengo dai ruderi, dalle chiese, dalle pale d'altare, dai borghi dimenticati sugli Appennini e sulle Prealpi, dove sono vissuti i fratelli. Giro per la Tuscolana come un pazzo, per l'Appia come un cane senza padrone, o guardo i crepuscoli, le mattine su Roma, sulla Ciociaria, sul mondo, come i primi atti del dopostoria, cui io assisto per privilegio d'anagrafe dall'orlo estremo di qualche età sepolta. Mostruoso è chi è nato dalle viscere di una donna morta, e io, feto adulto, mi aggiro più moderno di ogni moderno a cercare fratelli che non sono più.
Pasolini si dà al cinema facendo a cartoni nel 1960.
Pasolini started in film by making Accattoni in 1960. Expressing himself with a language by using specific terms that are technically cinematic, such as PPP, when speaking of himself. One of the words that steals from cinematic language is the word editing or montage.
Dunque non è che io ho cambiato la tecnica letteraria, in realtà ho cambiato la lingua, e questo forse implica una certa mia protesta contro la lingua letteraria italiana, addirittura contro la lingua italiana tout court, e forse addirittura contro la società che in questa lingua si esprime. In certo senso, facendo il cinema, ho voluto cambiare nazionalità.
So then he understands that with the montage, you can transform the notion of time, because you can tell a story of centuries in an hour and a half. Because montage cuts and puts together, pieces together, a logical reconstruction of events, together with the images of a story that may be in reality quite a bit longer. What's left of a man are the essential elements, those that characterized and separate from the others. He realized this right away, Pasolini did, in the editing process. So montage operates on the time and history of a man, that which is placed on film. In Pasolini's strategy, it was to express yourself to the maximum level with death. Either express yourself and die, or remain unexpressed and immortal. This is a proposition divided in half, and the second half negatively confirms the first. Pasolini says, if I don't die, I don't express myself, therefore I'll stay alive. immortal. At a certain point, he says, the well-chewed meat of my mother that I never swallowed. And then it says that, yet this isn't the greatest of sorrows. That is, I'm going ahead with this operation, getting myself killed. Or celebrating the myth. That is death reborn, dying, returned to life, even though the presence of my mother is a huge problem for me.
È un grande problema per me, ma di fronte a
But keeping in mind my mother's age, and my project, and my life, it's not really such a great song.
libero.
Free to choose death. And if you don't understand that, it's your problem. Pasolini used these linguistic games to say and not to say. Because it's a feast day. This is a pigsty, if I'm not mistaken. And by protest, I want to die by humiliation. I want them to find me dead, with my sex hanging out, with my pants stained with semen, among the weeds, lacquered with blood-colored liquid. I am convinced that even the most extreme acts, of which I alone, actor, am a witness, will have their sense in the end.
Quando
When he says a river that no one can reach, he is alluding to the Tiber, which runs and empties into the Tyrannies. But he also adds that no one has the courage to follow me down this road. That is his uniqueness and pride in being alone in this deed.
preparare con sorno
To prepare, with blind irony, the last refusal, with a capital R, the refuse of the world. Therefore, prepare one's own death, and organize it with blind irony. One who wants to be ironic and sarcastic right up to the very end, without caring what others may think or what others may say about him. See, he doesn't want to make his death a common suicide or just another death among the billions, but one which was wanted, constructed, and prophesied by he himself, Pasolini. It was fundamentally theorized in the course of time between 1958 and 1975. It was a representation of all that he did in his life for 1975. Because he did nothing else but talk about himself in his films, in his poetry, and in all his other works.
Ecco, noi scendiamo a Gerusalemme. E il figlio dell'uomo sarà consegnato nelle mani dei capi dei sacerdoti e degli scribi. Ed essi lo condanneranno a morte. E lo daranno in balia dei pagani per essere schernito, flagellato e crocifisso. E al terzo giorno risorgerà.
When Pasolini makes Il Vangelo, he goes to Assisi to better understand certain things and to explore ways that would not offend the Christian faith. But stylistically analyzing the film, you see Christ speaking in a close-up for several seconds. And you know it's Pasolini himself who is speaking with Christ's voice, and he says things of great religious and mythical value. Through Il Vangelo, Pasolini imitates Christ in a special way with a very precise feeling, and he communicates in a very concrete manner. He says to his mother, "You will put the Madonna under the cross." And there she was, under the cross. And he says, "You must cry, because if you don't cry..." And the mother understands, and indeed begins to cry. Pasolini says it all right there. I deciphered his language. For example, in this case, the plural is distorted. Life means the afterlife. Solitude means death, and poetry means to express yourself by dying. I only deciphered Pasolini, and I think it is indeed a decipherment which is extremely coherent and puts in order all of Pasolini's work. The public can believe what it wants to believe. Pasolini knows what is the real motive by which one accepts without having the certainty of his actions, and why I'm still here, leading a double life as a painter and code breaker of this most extraordinary story. If someone were to come up to me and tell me that this is not the proper solution to all of Pasolini's work, then they must offer me another that has the same coherence, with the same unique perspective point, that puts everything in its proper order. I remember that the newspaper, L'Unità, yes, L'Unità, they called me in Francisco, November 2nd, I think it was 1982, yes, and asked me for an article on Pasolini. I wrote a long piece that took up the entire page, and I used the word shaman. I said, shaman Pasolini, and obviously it was erased immediately. I mean to say that Pasolini considered himself Christian, with origins in the modern agnostic era and culture 3 centuries after Christ. Something with the utmost sincerity and calmness. I'm very much amazed that someone would accept to occupy themselves with the work of Pasolini. Certainly, someone will eventually pay for it, because he had worked for years and years, and I'm sure that both publishers and eventual mysterious buyers that we still haven't met and we don't know will eventually want to sign a contract. Well, can you really entrust Pasolini's life and his work, and therefore his fiscal heredity, to some publisher, some producer, especially after... I'll give you an example. At the exhibition in Monaco, many things were cleared up. But Pasolini will be republished because it's, as he said, a purely intellectual thriller. Graziella Cossi has always said that Pasolini should be translated letter for letter, which means opening the dictionary, search for the meaning, and find yourself in front of 10 different cases and innumerable choices. The first first, the second, the third, the fourth. Which interpretation is the truest and the most coherent of the word? And the word with context, etc., etc. I feel a great affection for Graziella Carcosi, but I don't quite understand her reasoning in that. I'll explain. If I were her, I'd have come up to see me, or I would have invited me to Rome to say, I'm sorry, but the things you wrote disturbed me a great deal. Shall we talk about it? But I don't think I've written foolishness. It must have been about 4 or 5 days after Pasolini's funeral, when all his friends from Rome who had accompanied his body up to Casarsa, they left and went back home. Well, I was walking around my garden when all of a sudden I noticed something over by the gate. Something I wasn't sure. I walked over, I see a package right there by the gate. It was a cardboard package. I opened it, and inside were 3 reels of film. There was no sender marked, but there was handwriting, and it was addressed to me. When I discovered it was Salò, I didn't immediately connect with Pasolini's death. This was a clear sign that the montage was finished. Pasolini had sent this completed Salò to me, as absolute as it left the editing room. I was embarrassed, and I didn't know what to do. I called Giovanna Botteri's father in Trieste, who is still alive, by the way, and can testify to everything. Well, we had only about 20 people, all who were naturally in the film. The film was dreadful, as you know. It provoked consequences that were more or less foreseen. He told me, I will finish this film and nobody will see it because it will be burned in the public squares. Even though he prepared me for it, when I finally saw Salò, I was shocked. Keeping in mind his death as well. I don't know, I came out of the theater. I tried to catch my breath and I went back in again. Now, I really have to say something that I reputed to be the most important, and that is a very clear message that must be deciphered. Pasolini communicates to me that the montage is complete. Therefore, he is about to die. I descend into hell, and know things that don't disturb the peace of others. But be very careful. The tone is prophetic, of one who is about to face an experience that is absolutely abnormal. Hell is rising toward you. He's speaking about the world turning. Just look around you. Preventive wars, petroleum that governs everything. You're not allowed to invent a new automobile motor because if you do, they'll rub you out immediately. You're all very lucky that after a good meal and a few drinks, you can discuss and put your labels on everything. He was killed by the Secret Service, or it was a suicide by delegation. but it doesn't refer to the structure of his writings and the logic of Pasolini's mythical tale. They don't even read anymore. They just see one or two films and try to have something to discuss, and therein lies the problem. So Pasolini precedes them, and he says, "Blessed are you who put your labels on my death," and define it in such a way. And finally, I'd like to address Colombo, who I met in New York when I was there to present Pasolini's drawings. If I were he, I'd reopen the documents. Why don't you write something more precise? The memory of these feelings, or even a more serious investigation, because someone who witnessed everything right up to the very end and does nothing, he dies in that mysterious way, after he even described it in Petrolio, his last book.
Alle volte è dentro di noi qualcosa, e tu sai bene perché è la poesia, qualcosa di oscuro che fa luminosa la vita, un pianto interno, una nostalgia gonfia di asciutte, pure lacrime.
The fact that we're all here today talking about Pasolini 30 years after his death is a rather interesting phenomenon, because his affirmations and his linguistic strategies and the way that he had of expressing himself, his ambiguity, his prophecy, they allow us to talk about this very particular case that is very rare in other artists and authors. I don't feel grief for Pasolini's death. I feel joy. I'm very happy to be able to investigate the life and work of an artist that I loved while alive, and one who I respected immensely for having reached his goal, because it must have been very painful. It's something I've said 1,000 times. Trust me, I'm a magician. If I had said that to Pasolini, that I can help you reach your goal, and that I had no idea what he was doing when he was alive, and if I had known, and I had gone to him with such presumption, I would have said,